The joke. Victoria Langford asked the poor mechanic for financial advice as a joke. 3 minutes later, standing in the smell of oil and rust, she realized she might lose everything she owned because she had laughed. The broken Ferrari. The Ferrari did not belong in that street. It was too red, too clean, too expensive for a town where the paint peeled from buildings like tired skin and most storefronts survived on handwritten signs and fading hope. The engine cut out with an undignified cough, the kind of sound that made men who loved machines wince instinctively. The car rolled forward another 10 feet before dying completely, nose pointed at a garage whose sign hung crooked, Miller & Sons Auto, since 1979. Victoria Langford stared through the windshield in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. Daniel Brooks leaned forward from the passenger seat, his tailored jacket already wrinkling. That place? He said as if the building had personally insulted him. Victoria, this car is worth more than that entire block. Victoria pressed her lips together. She hated delays. She hated unpredictability. And most of all, she hated being stranded somewhere she didn't control. She stepped out of the Ferrari, heels clicking sharply against cracked asphalt. The garage door was open halfway, sunlight slicing through dust motes inside. The air smelled like oil, metal, and something faintly burned. A man stood beneath the hood of a pickup truck, his back turned. He wore faded blue overalls, sleeves rolled to the elbows, arms lean and marked with old scars. His hair was dark with streaks of gray, cut short, practical. He didn't look up when she approached. "Excuse me," Victoria said. No reaction. Daniel scoffed. "Hey, mechanic." The man slowly straightened. When he turned around, his face wasn't what Victoria expected. No slack-jawed stare. No sudden panic at the sight of her. His eyes were calm, gray, steady, unreadable. "Yes," he said. "My car broke down," Victoria said, gesturing behind her without looking. "I need it fixed immediately." The man glanced past her, eyes flicking briefly over the Ferrari. He nodded once. "Push it inside." Daniel laughed sharply. "Push it? Do you know what that car is?" The mechanic met Daniel's gaze without irritation. "Yes." That answer annoyed Daniel more than ignorance would have. Victoria folded her arms. "How long?" The man shrugged. "Depends what's wrong. I have a meeting in 90 minutes. Then you might miss it." Something about the way he said it, flat, unbothered, made Victoria's jaw tighten. People usually bent around her schedule. This man didn't even acknowledge it. Still she nodded. "Fine." They pushed the Ferrari into the garage, its glossy red surface reflecting stained concrete and battered toolboxes. The mechanic worked in silence, movements efficient, unhurried. Victoria watched, irritation slowly giving way to curiosity. He didn't rush for her. Didn't ask who she was. Didn't care. That was rare. After a few minutes, he spoke without looking up. "Fuel pumps overheating." Daniel frowned. "That's impossible." The mechanic tilted his head slightly. "It isn't." He fixed the issue in under 20 minutes. When he stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag, Victoria checked her watch. On time. Efficient. "How much?" she asked, already reaching for her wallet. The man named a number so low Daniel actually laughed out loud. "You're joking." "No." Victoria paused, studying him. "You could charge 10 times that." "I don't." "Why not?" Sat on her tongue. Instead she handed him the money. As she turned to leave, something impulsive, something bored and sharp, rose in her chest. She stopped. "You're a mechanic," she said, half smiling. "Yes." Victoria gestured around the garage. "Tell me something. If you suddenly had $1 billion, what would you do with it?" Daniel grinned. "Oh, this should be good." The question was a joke. A way to amuse herself before getting back into her real life. She expected confusion. Or flattery. Or some cliché about yachts and mansions. The mechanic didn't answer immediately. He looked at her. Really looked. As if measuring the weight of her words, not the status behind them. Then he said, "I'd get rid of most of it." The garage went quiet. Daniel blinked. "What?" Victoria laughed once, surprised. "You'd give it away?" "No," the mechanic said calmly. "I'd dismantle it." Victoria tilted her head. "Dismantle money?" "Power," he corrected. "That kind of money isn't wealth. It's a liability pretending to be success." Daniel burst out laughing. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." The mechanic didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Victoria. She felt something shift, subtle, unsettling. Like a hairline crack forming in glass. "And you know this how?" she asked. Because engines and systems behave the same way, he said. Push them past what they're built to handle and they don't become stronger. They fail. Victoria's smile froze. She had built an empire on pushing systems past their limits, the joke that didn't land. Daniel clapped sarcastically. Amazing. A philosopher with a wrench. The mechanic shrugged. Just answering the question. Victoria should have walked away. She should have dismissed it as small-town nonsense. But instead she felt irritation, not because he was wrong but because she couldn't immediately prove he was. So, she said lightly, masking it, you're saying billionaires are broken engines? Some of them, he replied. The loud ones usually. Daniel stepped forward. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? The mechanic glanced at him. Someone insecure enough to answer that question for her. Victoria inhaled sharply. That was unexpected. Not disrespectful. Not submissive. Just accurate. She raised a hand, stopping Daniel before he could explode. Go on, she said to the mechanic. Enlighten me. He hesitated. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes, not fear but calculation. As if deciding whether this was worth his time. You don't want real advice, he said. Try me. He leaned against the workbench. You probably own assets that don't produce value. You call them strategic because they inflate your sense of control. You confuse movement with progress. And you measure risk by spreadsheets instead of stress. Daniel scoffed. That's. Victoria raised her hand again, slower this time. How would you measure it? She asked. The mechanic smiled faintly. It wasn't smug. It was tired. By asking who loses sleep if it fails, he said. If the answer isn't you, it isn't risk. It's gambling with other people's lives. Silence pressed in. Victoria felt it, an uncomfortable recognition. Boardroom faces flashed through her mind. Employees she'd never met. Decisions she signed off without reading fully. That's poetic, she said carefully. It's practical. Daniel laughed again, louder. Victoria, come on. This is ridiculous. But Victoria wasn't laughing anymore. What's your name? She asked. Ethan, he said. Ethan Walker. And you learned all this fixing cars? He nodded toward the pickup. You listen long enough, patterns repeat. Something about that sentence stuck with her. Well, Ethan, Victoria said, slipping back into her polished tone, you've officially given me the strangest financial advice I've ever heard. He shrugged. You asked. She took a step closer. What if I said I wanted more? Daniel stared at her. Victoria? What if, she continued, eyes locked on Ethan, I wanted actual advice. Not metaphors. Ethan studied her face. Up close she looked sharper. More controlled. But there was tension beneath it. He saw it now. You wouldn't like it, he said. Her smile returned, thinner. I didn't like my Ferrari breaking down either. Fair enough, Ethan said. But advice has consequences. So does ignorance. The words surprised her as much as him. Daniel threw his hands up. This is insane. You're not seriously. I am, she said, not taking her eyes off Ethan. A pause stretched. Fine, Ethan said at last. Then here's the first piece. Don't listen to anyone who profits from agreeing with you. Daniel went still. Victoria felt the weight of it settle in her chest. She thought of Daniel. Of the board. Of the people who smiled whenever she spoke. And the second? She asked quietly. Ethan wiped his hands again, slower this time. Stop confusing dominance with stability. They're opposites. Her breath caught. Just slightly. Explain. Dominance requires pressure, he said. Stability requires balance. Pressure always breaks something eventually. Victoria stepped back. This wasn't funny anymore. The first crack. All right, she said, forcing a laugh that sounded wrong even to her. That's enough wisdom for one afternoon. She turned toward the Ferrari. Victoria, Daniel said under his breath, you don't need this. She ignored him. As she opened the car door, Ethan spoke again, not loud, not urgent. One more thing. She paused, hand on the handle. If your meeting today is about leveraged expansion, he said, cancel it. The words landed like a slap. Victoria turned slowly. You don't know anything about my meeting. He met her gaze. No. But I know the timing. And I know the look on people who think momentum is safety. Daniel snapped. That's it. This conversation is over. Victoria raised her hand again, but this time it trembled. What happens if I don't cancel it? She asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. You'll make money, he said. For a while. And then? Then something you can't control will break. And you won't see it coming because you'll be too busy congratulating yourself. The garage felt smaller suddenly. Victoria swallowed. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Ethan looked around the garage, the cracked walls, the aging tools, the pickup truck that had been there since before she'd made her first million. Because I've seen this engine before, he said. Different hood. Same failure. Daniel laughed again, but there was no humor in it now. You expect her to take advice from you? Look around, man. You're still here. Ethan's eyes flicked to him. Yes. And she isn't. Not yet. Victoria flinched. She climbed into the Ferrari and shut the door, heart beating faster than it should have. As the engine roared back to life, she realized something deeply unsettling. For the first time in years, she didn't feel in control. She pulled onto the road, leaving the garage behind, but the mechanic's words followed her like a shadow. Aftermath. The Ferrari sped toward the highway, Daniel ranting beside her. That guy was a nobody. A bitter nobody. Victoria didn't respond. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder for her meeting. Leveraged expansion. Her fingers hovered over the screen. For reasons she couldn't explain, she hesitated. Back at the garage, Ethan watched the red car disappear. Frank Miller emerged from the back, wiping his hands. You poked the bear again? Ethan smiled faintly. She poked herself. Frank chuckled. That woman had money written all over her. Money isn't the problem, Ethan said quietly. Frank raised an eyebrow. Then what is? Ethan looked down at his hands, scarred, steady. Belief, he said. In the wrong things. He went back to work. But somewhere miles away, a billionaire sat behind the wheel of a Ferrari, staring at a meeting reminder, and wondering why a poor mechanic had just made her afraid. Victoria Langford canceled the meeting 5 minutes before it began. She stared at the confirmation screen longer than necessary, waiting for relief that didn't come. Instead, what she felt was something far more dangerous: uncertainty. The kind she'd spent 20 years training herself to erase. Daniel Brooks noticed immediately. You did what? He demanded, standing in the glass-walled office overlooking the city. Morning light bounced off steel and marble, the kind of space designed to remind everyone who held power. I postponed it, Victoria said calmly. Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. That meeting involved 12 institutional partners and a leverage window that doesn't reopen. You don't postpone something like that. Victoria remained seated, hands folded. I just did. This is because of that mechanic, isn't it? His voice dropped, incredulous. Victoria, that man fixes transmissions. He doesn't understand capital markets. Victoria lifted her eyes to him slowly. You're wrong. Daniel scoffed. About what? He understands systems, she said. And right now, ours doesn't feel as stable as you keep insisting. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're letting a stranger get into your head. No, she replied. I'm letting him ask questions no one here does. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He forced a smile. Fine. Entertain your curiosity. But don't confuse novelty with insight. Victoria said nothing. Because she wasn't confused. She was disturbed. Coffee, not boardrooms. 2 hours later, Victoria Langford sat in a diner with cracked vinyl booths and laminated menus that hadn't changed since the late 90s. She had insisted on coming alone. Ethan Walker sat across from her, stirring black coffee slowly. He'd changed out of his overalls into jeans and a plain jacket. No watch. No phone in sight. This isn't where billionaires usually take advice, he said. I don't usually take advice from mechanics, Victoria replied. Yet here we are. A waitress approached, eyeing Victoria's tailored coat and expensive posture. What'll it be? Coffee, Victoria said. Then after a pause, black. The waitress nodded, slightly surprised. When she left, Victoria leaned forward. I want you to explain something. Ethan waited. You said you'd dismantle $1 billion. Not give it away. Not invest it. Dismantle it. She held his gaze. Explain that. Ethan took a sip of coffee. Money at that scale stops being a tool, he said. It becomes gravity. Everything bends around it. People stop telling you the truth. Systems stop correcting themselves. That's dramatic, Victoria said. No, he replied evenly. It's mechanical. She frowned. You really do see everything like a machine. Because machines don't lie, Ethan said. People do. Victoria exhaled. All right. Let's say I accept that premise. What would you actually do? I'd reduce complexity, Ethan said. You don't add power to a failing engine. You strip it down. Find what's essential. Remove what's ornamental. Ornamental? She repeated. He nodded. Acquisitions you don't understand. Growth for headlines. Leverage layered on leverage because it looks impressive. Her spine stiffened. You don't know my portfolio. I don't need to, Ethan said. Your calendar told me enough. That irritated her more than she liked. You assume I'm reckless. I assume you're successful, he corrected. And success breeds a specific blindness. Victoria crossed her arms. Which is? The belief that past wins justify future risks. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She hated how cleanly his words landed. Let me ask you something, Ethan said. How much money do you need to feel safe? Victoria didn't answer immediately. That's not a fair question, she said finally. Safety isn't about a number. Ethan smiled faintly. That's what people say right before naming a number. She sighed. Enough to know I can survive anything. That's vague. She leaned back. Because the answer keeps changing. Exactly, Ethan said. That's the problem. Victoria bristled. You think poor people have some magical wisdom about money? No, Ethan said. I think poor people understand consequences better. That sounds romantic. It's not, he replied. It's survival math. She raised an eyebrow. Explain. When you don't have a buffer, every decision matters, Ethan said. You learn fast what breaks you and what doesn't. Rich people outsource that learning. To advisors, Victoria said. To excuses, Ethan countered. To optimism dressed as analysis. She stared at him, irritation mixing with curiosity. You're saying my entire industry is delusional. I'm saying it's insulated, he replied. Insulation hides heat until something melts. The waitress returned with Victoria's coffee. She took a sip, grimaced slightly, then steadied herself. All right, Victoria said. Let's test you. Pretend you're advising me. Real advice. Ethan considered her for a long moment. You won't like the first step, he said. Try me. You'd need to stop growing. Her laugh was short and sharp. That's impossible. That's what cancer says too, Ethan replied calmly. Silence fell between them. Victoria felt a flash of anger. Growth is how companies survive. No, Ethan said. Balance is how systems survive. Growth is how they overextend. She leaned forward, eyes hard. You're oversimplifying. No, he said. I'm simplifying on purpose. Complexity hides fear. She paused. What fear? She asked quietly. Ethan met her gaze. Irrelevance. The word hit harder than she expected. Victoria set her cup down slowly. You talk like someone who's been inside boardrooms. Ethan didn't respond. You predicted my meeting, she continued. You understand leverage, risk exposure, behavioral incentives. She tilted her head. You're not just a mechanic. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I am now, he said. That's not an answer. He looked out the window, watching a delivery truck idle at the curb. People change. Because they fail? Victoria asked. Because they succeed, Ethan replied. At the wrong things. She studied his face. There was something buried there. Not bitterness. Not regret exactly. Something heavier. Why did you leave? She asked softly. Ethan's eyes flicked back to her. I didn't leave. I stepped off. From what? He hesitated, then shook his head. That part isn't advice. It's history. Victoria nodded, respecting the boundary. But the mystery only sharpened her interest. All right, she said. Then answer this instead. If you were me, what would you do right now? Ethan leaned back. You'd audit your fear. She blinked. My fear. Yes, he said. List the decisions you're rushing. The deals you're justifying. The ones that feel urgent but vague. She frowned. Urgency is opportunity. Urgency is usually panic, Ethan replied. Opportunity is patient. Victoria let out a slow breath. She hated how much this conversation was peeling things open. And if I find panic? She asked. Then you stop, Ethan said. Before the machine eats itself. The bet. Victoria checked her watch. Let's say I take you seriously. Ethan didn't react. What if I give you access? She continued. Limited. 1 week. You look at my portfolio. My strategy. You tell me where it breaks. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Why? Because if you're wrong, she said, I'll know. And if you're right? And if I'm right? He prompted. She hesitated. Then I'll owe you. Owing makes people resentful, Ethan said. I don't want that. She smiled thinly. Then think of it as a test. Ethan studied her. What happens if I fail? I walk away, Victoria said. And you go back to fixing cars. And if I don't? She met his gaze. Then I fund the garage. Fully. No strings. Ethan laughed softly. That's not leverage. No, Victoria said. It's respect. He considered it. There's one condition, he said. Name it. I don't take instructions from your people, Ethan said. And I don't present to your board. Victoria frowned. Why? Because truth doesn't survive committees, he replied. And your board doesn't want answers. They want reassurance. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. This is insane. She extended her hand. 1 week. Ethan looked at it for a long moment. Then he shook it. 1 week, he said. But understand something. What? If you do this, Ethan said, voice steady, you don't get to pretend you weren't warned. Victoria swallowed. Fair enough, she said. They stood. As she turned to leave, Ethan added, and Victoria? She paused. Cancel the next meeting too, he said. The one after that calendar gap. Her heart skipped. How do you? Patterns, Ethan said. They don't hide. Victoria walked out of the diner feeling lighter and heavier all at once. Behind her, Ethan sat back down, finishing his coffee. He knew what was coming. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure whether he was trying to stop a collapse or prove it was inevitable. The first sign wasn't the market. It was the silence. Victoria Langford sat alone in her office before dawn, the city still half asleep below the glass. Her phone lay face down on the desk. No messages. No alerts. No crisis emails demanding immediate action. That quiet unnerved her more than any panic ever had. Ethan Walker stood near the window, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the city the way a mechanic listens to an engine, without distraction, without hope, without fear. Everyone thinks collapse is loud, he said. It isn't. Victoria didn't look at him. You said this would take a week. It will, Ethan replied. But the damage starts before the noise. The warning signs. They had spent 3 days together going through her portfolio. Not presentations. Not slide decks. Raw data. Ethan refused the conference room. He pulled a chair beside her desk, asked for printed statements, handwritten notes, and access logs. He wanted timestamps. He wanted decision trails. Why this deal? He asked at one point, tapping a page. Victoria frowned. Because the upside was. No, Ethan interrupted calmly. Why that week? She hesitated. Daniel shifted in his seat, irritation sharp in his posture. Because the window aligned. The market sentiment was. Ethan held up a hand. Not asking you. Victoria stared at the page again. The answer came slowly, unwillingly. Because we just missed the quarter target, she admitted. Ethan nodded once. Pressure buy. Daniel scoffed. That's called leadership. That's called compensation anxiety, Ethan corrected. Different engine. Same smoke. Over and over, the pattern repeated. Every aggressive expansion traced back to urgency. Every leveraged position tied to reputation. Every strategic acquisition anchored to fear of stagnation. By the 4th day, Victoria's head throbbed. You're telling me everything I built is wrong, she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. I'm telling you it's impressive. And unstable. Daniel snapped. Unstable doesn't generate these returns. Ethan looked at him. Neither does gravity. Until it does. Victoria closed her eyes. She felt it now. A pressure she'd ignored for years. The subtle dread beneath the victories. The need to keep moving because stopping felt like death. Where does it break? She asked. Ethan turned a page, then another. Here, he said, pointing. And here. And definitely here. Daniel laughed incredulously. Those positions are insulated. Hedged 6 ways. Yes, Ethan said. Against expected failure. Victoria looked up sharply. Expected. No one hedges against the thing they believe won't happen, Ethan said. That's faith, not strategy. The words hung in the room. What happens? Victoria asked. Ethan leaned back. Liquidity tightens. Confidence slips. Then someone pulls first. And then? And then, Ethan said, everyone realizes they were all holding the same breath. The first drop. The market dipped on a Thursday. Nothing dramatic. A 0.5% slide. Analysts called it healthy correction. Daniel smiled. See? Noise. Ethan didn't smile. Watch volume, he said. Friday morning volume spiked. By afternoon, 2 mid-tier funds froze withdrawals. Victoria's phone started buzzing. Board members, partners, advisors. She ignored them. Now, she asked Ethan. Now you choose, he replied. Do you want to look calm, or be stable? Daniel leaned forward. We ride this out. Pulling now signals weakness. Ethan turned to him. No. Pulling now signals control. Victoria's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to hold. To trust the system. To trust herself. Give the order, Ethan said quietly. She didn't. Victoria, Ethan pressed, you don't need certainty. You need margin. She hesitated too long. Monday morning the drop doubled. The headlines sharpened. Markets rattled. Investor confidence wavers. Daniel was in full command mode. We reassure. We project strength. Ethan watched silently as decisions stacked on top of decisions. Patches over fractures. By Tuesday the fracture split. A major partner pulled out. The market didn't crash. It ran, the unraveling. Everything accelerated. Phones rang nonstop. Meetings blurred together. Screens flashed red. Victoria sat frozen as numbers erased years of growth in hours. This wasn't supposed to happen, Daniel muttered. Ethan stood behind her, unmoving. It always happens this way. Daniel rounded on him. You said pull earlier. I said pull before panic, Ethan replied. That window closed. Victoria's throat tightened. How bad? Ethan exhaled slowly. Bad enough to teach you something. Not bad enough to kill you. That didn't feel comforting. By Wednesday, the board demanded action. Emergency session. Closed doors. Raised voices. Daniel spoke first, confidently. This is a temporary shock. If we hold, we recover. Several heads nodded. Victoria looked at Ethan. He said nothing. She turned back to the board. We overextended. The room stilled. Daniel shot her a warning glance. We chased growth without margin, she continued. We ignored stress signals. Daniel cut in smoothly. With respect, this is not the time for self-flagellation. Ethan finally spoke. It's exactly the time. All eyes turned to him. Who is this? Someone demanded. A consultant, Victoria said. Daniel smiled thinly. An unvetted one. Ethan stepped forward. You're all arguing about optics while your system bleeds liquidity. You want reassurance. The market wants truth. A board member sneered. And you are. Ethan met his gaze. Someone who's seen this engine fail before. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. Victoria, if you listen to him. She stood. Silence fell. We pull back, she said. Now. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. You'll destroy confidence. Confidence built on denial deserves to die, she said quietly. The vote split. Barely. The order went out too late. The damage was already public. The blame. The media turned vicious. Langford Empire stumbles. Over-leveraged or overconfident. Investors demanded answers. The board demanded accountability. Daniel demanded distance. We need a narrative, he said privately. Someone external. Someone reckless. Victoria felt the trap closing. You mean Ethan, she said. Daniel didn't deny it. He advised caution, she said. And then panic, Daniel countered. He spooked you. Victoria's voice dropped. You ignored him. Daniel leaned in. And now you need to decide who survives this. She stared at him. For the first time she saw him clearly, not as a partner but as ballast cutting loose. No, she said. Daniel smiled coldly. Then it'll be you. The board meeting that followed was brutal. Daniel spoke with practiced sincerity. He framed the collapse as an overreaction. A loss of nerve. A failure of leadership. Eyes turned to Victoria. She could feel it, the instinct to deflect, to protect herself. She didn't. I approved every decision, she said. And I delayed the one that mattered. Murmurs rippled. Daniel stiffened. Victoria? This is on me, she continued. But the warning wasn't the problem. My hesitation was. The board recessed. The decision came back swift. Victoria Langford would step down as CEO pending investigation. Daniel was appointed interim lead. Ethan stood beside her as the room emptied. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She shook her head. No. You were right. She looked at him, eyes tired but clear. I just wasn't fast enough. The walk away. They stood outside the building as reporters gathered. Ethan didn't like crowds. He slipped away unnoticed. Victoria watched him go. "Ethan," she called. He stopped. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I know," he replied. "Then why did you help?" Ethan considered. "Because someone once helped me." "Too late." She swallowed. "Will you stay?" He shook his head. "My work here's done." He turned away. That night Ethan returned to the garage. Frank looked up. "Saw the news." Ethan nodded. "Rough." "Necessary," Ethan said. Frank sighed. "You ever get tired of being right?" Ethan looked at the pickup truck. "I get tired of being early." Across the city, Victoria sat alone in her apartment, the silence back again, but different now. Not ignorance. After midnight her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She answered. "Miss Langford," a calm voice said. "My name is Harold Green. I think we should talk." The truth emerges. They met the next morning. Harold Green was 70, precise, unassuming. A retired banker with eyes that missed nothing. "You know Ethan Walker," he said. "Yes," Victoria replied. "Do you?" Harold smiled faintly. "I helped ruin him." Her breath caught. "Excuse me?" "Years ago," Harold continued, "Ethan was one of the sharpest minds I'd ever seen. Too sharp. He saw flaws we didn't want acknowledged." Victoria leaned forward. "Why didn't I know his name?" "Because he walked away," Harold said. "After a collapse not unlike yours. Only bigger. Dirtier." "What happened?" "He refused to sign off on a deception," Harold said. "So we buried him." Victoria closed her eyes. "When he warned you," Harold said gently, "it wasn't theory. It was memory." Victoria felt the weight of it settle. "I laughed at him," she whispered. Harold nodded. "So did everyone. Until the engine failed." Returned to the garage. 2 days later Victoria stood outside Miller & Son's auto. No Ferrari. Just herself. Ethan looked up from an engine as she entered. "You came back," he said. "I did," she replied. "For advice. For truth." He wiped his hands. "That costs more than money." "I know," she said. She met his eyes. "I want to rebuild," she said. "Not the company. Myself." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Then we start where all repairs start," he said. "With what you broke." Victoria exhaled. For the first time since the collapse she felt something like stability. The second time Victoria Langford walked into Miller & Son's auto, she did it without armor. No entourage. No heels. No phone pressed to her palm like a shield. She wore jeans that still smelled faintly of the store and a jacket she didn't quite know how to carry herself in. The garage looked the same, oil-stained floor, tools hung where hands could find them blindfolded, the patient rhythm of work. What felt different was her. Ethan glanced up from beneath a hood. He took in the details the way he always did, not judging, just measuring. The steadiness of her breath. The absence of hurry. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late again," she replied. He nodded once and went back to work. That was his way. If you wanted words, you had to earn them with patience. She waited. They sat at a battered table near the back with 2 mugs of coffee that tasted like apology and resolve. "Harold told me," Victoria said. "About you." "About what happened?" Ethan's jaw tightened, then loosened. "Harold likes confessions when they're safe. He said you refused to sign off on a deception." "I refuse to call it prudence," Ethan said. "Words matter." She nodded. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." He studied her for a long moment. "What do you want?" "Truth," she said. "And a chance to fix what I broke." "That's a long list." "I'm not in a hurry." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "That helps." She swallowed. "Start with me." Ethan leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion but focus. "You want to rebuild. That means you accept 2 things." "Name them." "First," he said, "some things don't go back the way they were. Second, fixing systems starts with fixing incentives." She exhaled. "I stepped down." "Yes," Ethan said. "That's posture. Now comes structure." He took a pen and slid a scrap of paper across the table. He drew a simple diagram, boxes and arrows, nothing fancy. "Your old system rewarded speed over soundness," he said. "Confidence over correction. Loyalty over truth. That's not how we framed it." "It's how it functioned," Ethan replied. "Mechanics don't care what you call parts. They care what they do." Victoria watched the pen move. "So what does this do?" "It slows," he said. "It exposes stress before it snaps." She nodded. "The board won't like it." "They shouldn't," Ethan said. It reduces their leverage. She looked up. And yours? I don't want any. She smiled. That's what scares them. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday that smelled like rain and consequences. Victoria walked into the room alone. Cameras clicked. The headlines were already written, waiting to be proven right or wrong. Daniel Brooks sat at the opposite table, immaculate as ever, a calm smile resting on his face like a practiced lie. The chair recognized her. Ms. Langford, do you accept responsibility for the losses incurred under your leadership? Yes, Victoria said. Clear. Immediate. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel's smile tightened. She continued. But I reject the framing that this was a failure of caution. It was a failure of courage. The chair frowned. Explain. We built incentives that punished dissent, Victoria said. We rewarded reassurance. We treated uncertainty as weakness. Daniel leaned forward. With respect, this is revisionist. Victoria met his gaze. With respect, this is documented. She slid a folder across the table. Emails. Minutes. Risk memos stamped deferred and downplayed. Compensation structures that spiked when leverage climbed. Daniel's color drained. These decisions, Victoria said, weren't accidents. They were encouraged. Daniel stood. This is outrageous. So was calling panic what was actually prudence, Victoria replied calmly. The room went quiet. Ms. Langford, the chair said, who advised you to make these changes? Victoria paused. She could protect Ethan by omission. She could protect herself by deflection. She didn't. A consultant, she said. One who warned us early and was ignored. Daniel laughed sharply. A mechanic. Victoria nodded. Yes, a mechanic. A beat. Then another. He saw the system for what it was, she continued, because he'd seen it fail before. And because he had nothing to gain by lying. The chair leaned back. We will review the materials. Daniel sat slowly, eyes burning. Outside the rain began. The findings came fast. Daniel was removed. The board restructured. Bonuses clawed back. Policies rewritten in language that finally matched reality. The press tried to spin it. Fall from grace, rare accountability, calculated confession, but the facts resisted poetry. Victoria accepted a fine. She accepted a ban from executive roles for 3 years. She accepted the silence that followed when power leaves a room. What surprised her was the relief. She stood on her balcony one evening, city lights flickering below, and realized she could breathe without counting. Her phone buzzed. Ethan, garage at 7 tomorrow. She smiled. They didn't rebuild the company first. They rebuilt the garage. Victoria learned how to clean parts without rushing. How to listen for sounds that didn't belong. How to wait. Frank watched with amused approval. Never seen a billionaire scrub a carburetor. Former, Victoria corrected, grinning. And apprentice. Ethan corrected her posture once, gently. Don't force it. Let the tool work. She did. Word spread, not loudly but steadily. The garage took on apprentices. Not charity cases. People who wanted to learn. Ethan taught them systems. Victoria taught them accountability. Together they built a place where questions weren't punished. One afternoon, Lena showed up with a notebook. Dad says you're good at hard truths. Victoria laughed. I'm learning. They talked about college. About debt. About choices that compound. When Lena left, Ethan watched her go. You didn't promise anything. I promised honesty, Victoria said. That felt like enough. He nodded. 6 months later, a letter arrived. A foundation, quiet, well-funded, allergic to headlines, wanted Victoria to chair a rebuild initiative. Not to chase growth, but to shore up stability in companies that mattered. She brought the letter to the garage. They want me back, she said. Ethan read it once and handed it back. Do you want to go? I want to do it right, she said. With guardrails. He considered. You'll be tested. I know. You'll be tempted. I know. And you'll be lonely. She smiled. I won't be alone. Ethan's eyes met hers. A beat passed, not romantic, not dramatic. Just trust, the kind earned in silence. I'll help, he said. On one condition. She waited. I don't want a title. Done. And when I say stop, he added, you stop. She nodded. Done. On the day the foundation announced its mission, a reporter asked the question everyone expected. Ms. Langford, he said, microphone hovering, what's the most important lesson you've learned from this collapse? She glanced toward the edge of the crowd, where Ethan stood with his hands in his pockets, watching without wanting credit. She answered without hesitation. That wealth isn't what you accumulate, she said. It's what your systems can survive. Later, back at the garage, she asked him the same question she'd once asked as a joke. If you had $1 billion, she said softly, what would you do with it? Ethan smiled, the tired, honest kind. I'd make it small enough to tell me the truth, he said. And strong enough to stop me when I'm wrong. She nodded. That's the answer that shocked me. He shook his head. No. The shock was that you listened. They stood there as the day wound down, the rhythm of work steady and unglamorous and real. Outside, the sign still read Miller & Sons Auto, since 1979. Inside, a different kind of legacy took shape, one that didn't need applause to endure.